What is up, engine heads? It's time for iconic engines once again. And today we're talking about one of the most iconic engines ever made. The way this engine was born and the things that it has achieved have forever cemented its status in the Hall of Fame of internal combustion. Of course, I'm talking about Nissan's RB26 engine, a collection of two letters and two numbers known by virtually every petrolhead on planet Earth. And today, as always, we're going to discover our engine's history, its specifications, and its tuning potential. But also, we're doing something today that we usually don't do on iconic engines, and that's that we're going to be comparing our engine of choice with another engine throughout the video. You can probably already guess what we'll be comparing the RB26 with. Yes, of course, the 2JZ, its eternal rival, and a rivalry that was discussed probably already a quadrillion times. But today, I want to offer a different perspective on this rivalry. Now, I do understand that quarter mile and drag racing is probably the most popular form of motorsport in the United States and also in Australia. And I do understand that these two countries sort of dominate the English-speaking petrolhead part of the internet. And it seems that which matters most in quarter-mile racing has somehow trickled down into the shared pool of petrolhead opinions and tainted our collective minds. Now, I love drag racing as much as the next guy, and I definitely don't mean to diminish the achievements of the 2JZ, but saying that engine A is better than engine B because engine A can survive 1000 horsepower longer is like saying car A is better than car B because car A takes longer to overheat when it's idling at 5000 RPM in the middle of the desert. There's so much more to an engine than its ability to take ridiculous power. This is just one fraction of what makes it iconic. And today I'm going to explain why, as a petrolhead and as a man of culture, you should prefer the RB over the 2JZ. So the full official engine code of the RB26 is RB26DETT. Now D stands for double overhead camshaft, E stands for electronic fuel injection, and T and T are the two turbos fitted to the engine. What does RB stand for? Well, some will try to tell you that it's response and balance, or even rhythm and balance. Now, in reality, it stands for nothing. It's just a designation code for an engine series like SR, VG, JZ, you name it, whatever. But I like to think that RB stands for race bred, because it would really be fitting. Now, to truly understand where the RB26 comes from, we have to take a look at the Japanese Touring Car Championship, or JTCC. Now, this championship was known under many different names and held under many different regulations, including FIA's Group A regulations. But despite this, it was always Japan's premier touring car championship, a place where manufacturers could demonstrate the capabilities of their cars and earn the reputation needed to boost sales. The JTCC and later JGTC and finally Super GT was always to Japan and much of Asia what the DTM was to Germany and much of Europe. Now, both the 1987 and 1988 seasons of the JTCC were won by the Ford Sierra RS500 Cosworth, and even though Nissan succeeded in winning the 1989 season with their Skyline GTSR, they had realized even before this that their car was becoming less and less competitive. It has roughly the same weight as the Ford Sierra, but it was down on power. So even before 1989, Nissan started working on a car that had one goal: to obliterate the competition in the Japanese Touring Car Championship. Naganori Ito was appointed as the chief engineer and Kozo Watanabe as the chief experiment engineer for this new project. Now, the R32 project was a bit of a personal vendetta for chief engineer Ito, and this is because the previous generation of the Skyline, the R31, was seen as a bit of a failure by longtime Skyline owners, Skyline enthusiasts, as well as car critics in Japan. Now, Ito bore the brunt of this criticism because his name was on the project, but interestingly enough, he was forced to put his name on the project only because it was suddenly assigned to him and he was asked to finish it because the original chief engineer of the R31 project, Shinichiro Sakurai, had fallen ill. So to clear his name, Naganori Ito asked to be allowed to lead the R32 project from the very beginning. The starting point for the new project was the already existing 2-liter RB20 engine that was powering the current Skyline GTSR. Now, the engine was overboard and stroked to 2.4 liters to increase the power output. And although this did increase power, Ito and Watanabe quickly realized that power alone wasn't enough to upset the legendary Sierra Cosworth, because power was something that the Sierra had in spades. So in addition to improving power, the engineers decided to also improve the way the power was put down on the ground. Instead of being rear-wheel drive only, the new car would be all-wheel drive. And for this purpose, a brand new state-of-the-art all-wheel drive system was designed, a Tessa ETS, Advanced Total Traction Engineering System for all-terrain with an electronic torque split. And this giant acronym was beyond anything seen at the time. It featured multi-roll chains driving a wet clutch pack and a high-pressure electronic pump pressurizing the oil for said clutch pack. All of this was then controlled by a 16-bit computer and a 3-axis G sensor underneath the car. I'll remind you that these were the late 80s. As if this wasn't space age enough, the car would also receive a more advanced version of Nissan's HiCAS, or High Capacity Actively Controlled Steering. Essentially, it was rear-wheel steering that received inputs from numerous sensors such as the steering angle, vehicle velocity, and many more to control the rear-wheel tow to enable both low-speed maneuverability and high-speed stability. Now, all of this technology did do wonders for traction, but it also increased the weight of the car by 100 kilograms, which meant that the 2.4-liter engine wasn't enough anymore. So the engineers enlarged it again, this time to 2.6 liters, and then they got sick of all the RB20 enlarging, so they developed a brand new block and cylinder head for the new engine, and thus the RB26 engine was born. Production officially started in August of 1989, and Nissan started campaigning the car in Group A racing in 1990. But before the new car was officially offered for sale and let loose in the Japanese Touring Car Championship, it went to Nürburgring to offer a taste of what's to come. When it got there, it decimated the current record held by Porsche at 8:45. It decimated by more than 20 seconds, clocking in a time of 8:20, making it the fastest street-legal series production car around the Nürburgring at the time. So it did well at the Nürburgring, sure, okay, but what about its main goal, to dominate the Japanese Touring Car Championship? Well, the R32 did that. It did it like no car before it or after it. Of the 29 races that the R32 entered, it won 29. It won the championship every single year from 1990 to 1994. In fact, the Group A regulations had to be suspended due to the ridiculous domination of the R32 Skyline GTR. The R32 was also introduced into the Australian Touring Car Championship in 1990, where it quickly ended the reign of the previously all-conquering Ford Sierra Cosworth, winning the championship from 1990 to 1992. It also won Australia's largest race, the Bathurst 1000, in 1991 and 1992. In fact, the dominance was so ridiculous that the Australians nicknamed the car Godzilla, as in the monster from Japan. Yes, it was the Australians that gave the GTR the nickname Godzilla. Now, following this overwhelming dominance, the Australian Touring Car Championship also decided to change its rules to forbid all-wheel drive and turbocharging to prevent the R32 from competing and making things boring. Also in 1991, over the Spa 24 Hours, the R32 beat the Porsche 911 and the BMW M3 Evolution, scoring the fastest lap time and the overall win. Overall, the Godzilla moniker was justified and Naganori Ito's name was cleared, and everybody raved about the insane capabilities and the technology of the R32 Skyline. The R33 came in 1995, and although it was the first series production car to circle the Nürburgring in under 8 minutes, and although it did win races, it didn't have quite the motorsport success of the R32. Same goes for the R34, which also brought about numerous improvements and pop culture fame, but didn't quite amass the same number of trophies as the R32, mostly because rules were already changed everywhere to get rid of these cars. All in all, a Skyline GTR sporting an RB26 engine won a total of 13 titles in the Japanese Touring Car Championship. On the other hand, a Supra Mark IV won a total of 6 titles. When a Supra Mark IV scored its most famous win in the Touring Car Championship, the one in 1997, the Castrol Tom Supra, it didn't actually have a 2JZ under its hood. It had a 4-cylinder 3S GTE because the 2JZ was deemed to be too heavy. While starting in 2000, the Supras competing in the Touring Car Championship actually used the Trio Z V8 engine. So although the 2JZ is a quarter-mile giant, it's kinda undeniable that the RB26 is as well. But when it comes to professional, international motorsport, the 2JZ really pales in comparison to the RB26. Interestingly enough, both the R34 Skyline GTR and the Super Mark IV would end production in 2002. The Nissan GTR would return in 2007 with 470 horsepower from a Nissan engine hand-built in a Nissan factory. And again, it would do that which it does best: bring state-of-the-art technology to the playing field and make very expensive cars with fancy badges look so. The Supra, on the other hand, returned in 2019 with a hard borrow from BMW and realistically about 20 more horsepower than it had 17 years ago. So we have a 2.6 liter inline 6, and as you probably already know, inline 6 engines are beautifully balanced with perfect primary and perfect secondary balance. So although we do say perfect, there really is no such thing as truly perfect balance in a reciprocating piston engine, and all of the imbalances actually come from the piston masses themselves. And this is why increasing the number of pistons and reducing the mass of each individual piston actually makes the engine smoother and better balanced. Now, although cost and practicality has killed engines like the RB20 or the miniature V12 engines of the past, the reality is that small displacement engines with many cylinders can be incredibly smooth, and a 2.6 liter inline 6, at least on paper, has smaller imbalances than a 3 liter inline 6 engine. We have a very over-square engine design with 86 mm of bore and 73.7 mm of stroke. The result is an engine that revs high and happily spends lots of time at high RPMs. Compared to this, the 2JZ is a square engine design with 86 mm of bore and 86 mm of stroke. The longer stroke of the 2JZ doesn't just increase displacement, it also limits the maximum RPM of the engine, but it also does contribute to the maximum horsepower and torque being achieved earlier in the rev range. In general, the RB26 can be described as a peaky engine that comes alive at high RPMs and feels better the higher you rev it and the harder you push it. In contrast to this, the 2JZ, at least in stock form, is more of a grand tour design, offering acceleration that can feel more immediate and effortless while being a bit less rewarding at high RPMs. Another factor that contributes to this is that the 2JZ is a sequential twin-turbo while the RB26 is a parallel twin-turbo. Which of these two you prefer really comes down to the intended application and personal preference. The engine block is a closed-deck cast iron design, and as we know, this is an old proven formula for good strength and boost holding. Interestingly enough, Kozo Watanabe, who became the chief engineer for the R33 and R34 projects, said that he wanted to develop an all-aluminum linerless block for the RB26 engine, but couldn't do it because of cost issues. So here's at least one example where cost cutting turned out to be good for the tuning community. Inside the block we can find a very strong, stout forged crankshaft together with some pretty strong forged connecting rods. The pistons are cast aluminum and they have an integrated oil gallery into which block-mounted oil nozzles spray oil to keep piston temperatures in check. The cylinder head is belt-driven dual overhead cam with 4 valves per cylinder and some pretty well-designed Penroof combustion chambers together with some pretty large valves. In fact, the RB26 manages noticeably larger valve diameters despite an identical bore to the 2JZ. Also, the RB26 has an overall better port design, especially on the intake side, and it has a better flowing head. The valve actuation system is very similar on the RB and the 2J, and we have the camshaft acting directly on the valve without any sort of rockers in between. The R32 engine has a shim under bucket design, which has later evolved into a shimless design on the R33. The camshaft specs are also kind of similar on both the engines and are pretty mild, which was a result of the need to respect the gentleman's agreement on power, which was in force in Japan at the time. But the RB26 has another ace up its sleeve: individual throttle bodies, ITBs, a single throttle body for each individual cylinder, or in the case of the RB26, 3 sets of 2 throttle bodies. The only real downside to ITBs are increased manufacturing costs and an increased number of moving parts, but this is a small price to be paid for the improved power, throttle response and engine sound. When you see ITBs on an engine in stock form, it's a clear indication that the manufacturer is very serious about the performance of the engine and or the engine needed to be homologated as such. Maybe ITBs are one of the reasons why some people think that RB stands for response and balance. Well, that doesn't really matter. What's important is that the ITBs are one of the reasons why the RB26 is one of the best sounding engines to ever come out of Japan and an absolute joy to drive. Of all the engines we have covered so far in iconic engines, the RB26 is probably the most tuner-friendly engine. It's actually one of the most tuner-friendly engines, period, anywhere ever made. And this is because the engine was developed with around 500 to 600 horsepower in mind and then detuned to meet the gentleman's agreement. This means that the bulk of the tuning, the most important things, were already done by some very clever people and then masked using mild camshafts and boost reduction. This detuning was painfully obvious on the R32, for example, which featured a boost restrictor in the hose going from the boost solenoid to the turbo wastegate. The restrictor restricted the amount of air being bled from the system, which caused the turbo wastegate to open earlier and reduce boost pressure. But Nissan wanted to make it easier for owners to remove this and increase boost pressure, so they marked the offending hose with a dab of yellow paint. So all you had to do was replace a little piece of hose and boost would automatically increase from 11 to around 14 psi. So about 5 minutes under the hood with some very basic tools and you could call yourself a tuner. But let's say you want something more serious than a bump of 4 psi of boost pressure. Let's say you want around 500 horsepower. Well, you can do that, of course, with an RB26 without opening the engine up. To get around 500 to 600 horsepower, all you gotta do is bolt-ons like a larger intercooler, larger injectors, upgraded fuel pump, maybe a set of camshafts, and you definitely need to replace the stock T28 turbochargers who have a ceramic wheel, which is kind of fragile, so you need something a bit more robust and probably larger to get to 500 or 600 horsepower. A standalone ECU is also going to be a really good idea for both power and safety. Fortunately, the RB26 aftermarket is still pretty strong and we have lovely plug-and-play kits like this one from AEM, which makes installing a standalone ECU an absolute joy. Although making 500 or 600 horsepower on stock internals is definitely possible, we have to remember that these are 20 to 30-year-old engines. So when we say stock internals, we mean very fresh, rebuilt stock internals or something kept in a museum with regular fluid changes and being started up from time to time to keep the engine alive. So when we say stock internals, we mean healthy stock internals. Now, people have made more than 500 or 600 horsepower on stock internals. Some have even gone beyond 700 horsepower on stock internals, but we have to be realistic. At this power level with stock internals, the engine will have to be babied when you're driving it, and mindlessly trashing it at this power level and stock internals will not last long. Probably the most infamous obstacle to big power on stock internals on the RB26 is the oil pump, or more correctly, the combination of overly loose clearances and small contact patches between the crankshaft and the oil pump. This was present on the early engines made from 1989 to around 1991. Now, these engines are characterized by a short-nosed crankshaft and require precautions either in the form of N1 or aftermarket parts to prevent oil pump failure at high RPMs. Nissan later rectified this issue themselves with the introduction of the long-nosed crankshaft, which didn't suffer from the same problems. The long-nosed crankshaft is also one of the reasons why the R33 and 34 can rev higher than the R32 engine. Now, going safely and reliably beyond 500 to 600 horsepower is going to be a different and more expensive ballgame. You will need to open the engine up, and it's a good idea to replace the stock pistons and rods with forged aftermarket pistons and rods. The crankshaft can stay if it's healthy, in perfect shape, or brand new, unless you're planning to venture beyond 1000 horsepower. Up to about 1000 horsepower, the crankshaft has been verified to be reliable and it can take this sort of power level. To ensure that the block is up to the task of massive power levels, many will choose to sonic test the block to measure bore thickness and measure block hardness and check for core shifting. Now, RB26 blocks have multiple different stampings to differentiate the basic, stock, regular blocks from the N1 and GT blocks. Now, although the N1 and GT blocks have a 1mm thicker block deck and they do have a higher nickel content, core shifting has been found in these blocks as well, and they do have variations in bore thickness too. So if you decide to chase massive power levels, then block measurement is important regardless of the block stamping. Now, this variation in bore thickness and presence of core shifting is one of the reasons why people claim that the 2JZ is better than the RB26, because thanks to Toyota's crazy over-engineering efforts and quality control from the 90s, the 2JZ blocks do have less variation in their castings. They are more consistent, and this is why they can attack silly power levels with a bit more confidence. To get massive power, most will also choose to replace the twin-turbo setup with a very large single turbo. Although twin-turbo 1000 horsepower RB26s have been built, it's usually easier to get massive power with a single giant turbo. Also, in the interest of flowing the absolute maximum amount of air and sustaining massive boost pressures, the stock ITB setup will be replaced with a single giant intake plenum with a single throttle body. If you're chasing massive power levels, you will need more aggressive camshafts, and you'll probably need cams that have more than 9.15mm of lift. Now, 9.15mm of lift is around the physical limit of a camshaft you can fit inside the RB26 cylinder head. If you want to fit a larger camshaft, you will need to grind or machine away parts of the head for the lobe to clear the head. Now, when it comes to very aggressive camshafts, the RB26 is already set and you do not have to do anything else to the valve train because it has a shim under bucket or a shimless bucket system, which is great, unlike that on the 2JZ, which uses Toyota's characteristic shim over bucket system. Now, a shim over bucket system makes it a lot easier to adjust valve currents on the engine, but it also makes it impossible to use very aggressive cams with it because you risk a shim flying out from the bucket and basically making a mess under your cam covers. The better flow and better port design of the RB26 head is also a noticeable advantage at massive power levels because the head isn't an obstacle to power and doesn't require as much modification on the 2JZ, where the head can sometimes be a bit of a bottleneck in the system. So although it's definitely fun to build 1000 horsepower engines, I think that in the case of the RB26, it sort of takes away from the character of the engine a bit. This may not be a popular opinion, but I think the RB26 absolutely shines at about 400 to 500 horsepower. Because at this power level, it gets to keep its amazing soundtrack and driving feel, which clearly demonstrates the motorsport roots of this engine. And at this power level, it also still beautifully complements the amazing chassis and drivetrain of the Skyline GTR. Although decades of aftermarket evolution have changed our perception of the capabilities of the 2JZ and the RB26, when it comes to the original purpose and the original intentions of the engineers behind these engines, it becomes evident that every aspect of both the GTR and the RB26 has racing in its genes, something that this car and engine combo has more than demonstrated with undisputable results in the field of motorsport. Although the obsession with triple-digit horsepower seems to imply that casting consistency and core shifting is what we should be concerning ourselves with, in stock form the 2JZ and the Supra next to the GTR look like just another overweight rear-wheel drive Grand Tourer and an engine suitable for such a car. The 2JZ's greatest claim to fame is its ability to swallow massive horsepower, which is a consequence of Toyota's over-engineering and quality control, which is impressive in its own right. But next to the RB26's tangible motorsport heritage, the 2JZ, at least in my book, looks a bit boring. And there you have it, the RB26 juxtaposed against the 2JZ. And now, as always, we end the video with some cringy rap. From the R to the B to the 2 and the 6, put your helmet on and get your slicks. I was born to race, and race I did. Pole position on the starting grid. The highest spot on the podium is where I be. They would bend the rules to get rid of me. I was born to win, and when I did, a 2JZ's better, oh no, God forbid. All my opponents end up a casualty, so kneel before me. I'm JDM royalty. That wasn't bad.